Most people think the first LEGO mistake is spending too much. In practice, the first mistake is buying a build that asks for more time than real life will allow. A set can be beautiful and still be the wrong starting point. A compact project like tiny plants can fit into one relaxed evening. A giant project like Titanic asks for a very different rhythm. One gives you quick progress. The other becomes part of your room and your week. Neither is automatically better. The right choice depends on how you want the build to feel when work ends and your attention is limited. In the 2026 to 2028 buying window, this matters even more because the adult catalog keeps offering stronger display value at every size. That creates more temptation and more confusion. The smart move is simple. Choose your build by time commitment first, then choose theme, then choose size. That one order prevents disappointment, half-finished boxes, and expensive projects that turn into guilt instead of enjoyment. Empathetic buyers often compare only shelf impact and box appeal. They see Orchid and think easy. They see the Starry Night and assume the same kind of experience. They see Ferrari Daytona SP3 and imagine a faster version of a medium display build. That is where regret starts. Build time is not just about piece count. It is about repetition, sorting, instruction density, structural steps, and how often the model asks you to slow down. A set that looks calm on the shelf may require more concentration than a larger model with cleaner repetition. A car can demand long focused stretches. A floral display can feel lighter even when it takes longer than expected. When people say they do not have time for LEGO, they usually mean something more precise. They do not have time for a build that gives progress too slowly for their schedule. They do not want a project that must live on the table for days. They do not want to restart their concentration every night. So the real problem is not time alone. It is the mismatch between your available time blocks and the way the set delivers progress. The guiding rule is to buy for session length, not for total hours. That changes everything. If your free time comes in short evening blocks, choose builds that create visible wins in 30 to 90 minutes. If your free time comes in weekend blocks, larger and denser sets become realistic. If you like to disappear into a project for several days, then a flagship can make sense. This rule is stronger than theme preference because it protects the emotional experience of building. Tiny plants works well when you want frequent completion moments. Orchid suits a calmer single sitting or a couple of shorter sittings. The Starry Night fits buyers who enjoy methodical progress and do not mind slower sections. Ferrari Daytona SP3 rewards focus over several dedicated sessions. Titanic is not a casual impulse build. It is a planned commitment. Once you see sets this way, the catalog becomes easier to navigate. You stop asking which set is best in general. You start asking which set matches the way your week is actually structured. That is the decision that keeps LEGO relaxing instead of turning it into another unfinished obligation. The safest starting lane is the fast completion build. This is where you should look if you want the emotional lift of finishing something quickly and displaying it right away. Tiny Plants is a strong example because it breaks the project into small, satisfying units. You can finish a section, reset your space, and still feel complete. Orchid sits slightly further along the same lane. It is still approachable, but it asks for a little more patience and a little more table time. This lane is ideal for adults with irregular schedules, people returning to LEGO after years away, and buyers who do not yet know whether they enjoy a long project. The benefit is not just shorter build time. The benefit is momentum. You are far more likely to continue with LEGO when your first experience ends in success rather than fatigue. Longer advantage is display flexibility. Smaller botanical-style sets usually leave less clutter during the build and less pressure after it. They do not demand a long protected workspace. They do not dominate the room before you know whether the hobby fits your routine. If your week is fragmented, this lane should be your default entry point. The second lane is the balanced weekend build. This is where many adult buyers should actually begin because it gives enough depth to feel substantial without becoming a long-term commitment. Hokusai, the Great Wave, works well here because it creates clear visible progress and strong display payoff without asking for a giant physical footprint during the build. The Starry Night moves into the denser side of this lane. It is more layered, more deliberate, and better for someone who enjoys a slower artistic rhythm. Notre Dame de Paris belongs here for a different reason. It asks for patience and attention, but the project still feels manageable when divided across a weekend or a few quiet evenings. This lane is ideal for people who want LEGO to feel immersive but not consuming. You get the sense of a real project. You still maintain a clear finish line. For many buyers, this is the sweet spot of the adult catalog because the set feels meaningful, the display result feels premium, and the time investment stays compatible with ordinary life. If you want one purchase that proves whether deeper Lego is worth it for you, this is usually the right lane. The third lane is the multi-session commitment build. This is where visual ambition increases and your schedule starts to matter much more. Ferrari Daytona SP3 is a strong example because the appeal is not only the finished model. The appeal is the process of working through layers, mechanisms, and careful construction over multiple sittings. Eiffel Tower creates a different version of the same reality. It is less about technical systems and more about steady large-scale progression. This lane works best when you enjoy returning to the same project several times and seeing cumulative growth. That sounds obvious, but many buyers overestimate this preference. They think a large set will feel more rewarding simply because it is larger. In reality, a large build only feels rewarding when repeated setup and repeated concentration do not drain the experience. Space matters here as much as time. A model that stays open on a table for days changes the feel of a room. It also changes whether you can build casually or must protect the project between sessions. Choose this lane only if you already know that continuing a build over several evenings feels motivating rather than heavy. The final lane is the flagship marathon. This is not the correct first stop for most buyers, even when the set is the one they admire most. Titanic represents this lane clearly. The experience is long, spatially demanding, and emotionally different from a shorter display build. Ferrari Daytona SP3 can approach this feeling for buyers who build slowly. Eiffel Tower can reach it through scale alone. A flagship is best when the build itself is part of the reward structure. You do not just want the object at the end. You want days of gradual progress, long quiet sessions, and the satisfaction of seeing a major project take shape. If that is true, a flagship can feel exceptional. If that is not true, the same set can feel endless. Buyers often confuse admiration with fit. They love the finished model, so they assume they should own it now. A better question is whether their current routine can support the pace that model requires. If the answer is no, the smarter choice is not to reject the flagship forever. It is to delay it until your habits and workspace make the experience enjoyable. That is how you keep anticipation positive instead of turning it into pressure. The wrong first purchase is usually the most admired complex set in your mental wish list. That can be Titanic because of scale. It can be Eiffel Tower because of presence. It can be Ferrari Daytona SP3 because the engineering looks impressive. It can even be the Starry Night if you are drawn to the art but have little patience for slower layered progress. None of these sets are bad choices in themselves. They become bad first choices when the buyer is really looking for quick recovery, low friction setup, or a reliable evening hobby after work. Another common mistake is buying a demanding set to prove commitment to the hobby. That logic reverses the correct order. You do not prove commitment by surviving a mismatched first build. You build commitment by enjoying the first one enough to want a second. The best decision engine is not ambition, it is repeatability. Ask whether you can picture yourself returning to the same project with genuine energy after a long day. If that answer feels uncertain, move down one-time lane. Starting smaller does not limit you. It protects the path that leads to larger builds later. My recommendation is simple. Start one lane below the set that flatters your ego. If you think you are ready for a flagship, begin with a balanced weekend build. If you think you need a balanced weekend build, begin with a fast completion build. This usually creates a better first experience and gives you much cleaner information about what kind of Lego builder you actually are. Tiny plants is the safest low-risk entry. Orchid is a strong next step when you want a little more presence. Hokusai the Great Wave is excellent when you want a substantial display piece without turning the build into a long campaign. The Starry Night is a good test for buyers who suspect they enjoy slower deliberate construction. This recommendation works because it preserves curiosity. You finish wanting more, not wanting relief. That is the right emotional signal. When a first set ends well, the second purchase becomes smarter. You learn whether you prefer frequent completion, methodical detail, or longer mechanical commitment. That makes every later upgrade more accurate and far less expensive in emotional terms. The next step is not to hunt for the biggest set you can justify. The next step is to define your build session honestly. One evening, one weekend, several evenings. or a true long project. Once that is clear, the catalog stops feeling random. Tiny plants and orchids serve the short session path. Hokusai, the great wave, and the starry night serve the substantial but manageable path. Ferrari Daytona SP3 serves the focused multi-session path. Titanic serves the long horizon path. That is the framework to keep. Not best overall. Not most famous. Not most expensive. Best fit for the way you actually build. Use that rule every time a box image tempts you into a bigger commitment than your schedule can support. You will finish more sets, you will enjoy more sessions, and your collection will grow in a way that feels calm, intentional, and sustainable. Full guide thinking always starts with the same principle. Choose the time lane first, then everything else becomes easier.